You fight your way through the Dremora to help the Treeminder with a ritual. You eventually succeed in getting rid of the Dremora and placing the potion in the pot as the Treeminder requested. After doing so, you run up the stairs to find the Treeminder in part of the temple, performing a ritual. He says to you,
Namira, I revere thee. Namira, I serve thee.
Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Fiction. In today's video, we are going to be discussing Namira. More specifically, why would anyone choose to worship Namira, and why you may want to on your next playthrough. To do this, we will have to go over several things. Firstly, who even is Namira? So what is she often known as, by who and why? Then we will discuss the history of Namira, this being what historical events has she been involved in, and what is her legacy. After this, we will move on to what is Namira god over, along with who worships her and how do they worship her. Finally, we will discuss the various creations of Namira, this being her artifacts, creatures, and of course her realm in Oblivion. So let us begin with who Namira actually is. Namira is a Daedric prince known by many names. One of these names, in the case of several Reachman clans, is the Children's God. Now, this does not mean that she is the god that the Reach children worship. Instead, it actually means that she is considered to be the goddess of small pests by some Reach clans. This is due to her often being associated with various creatures like slugs and spiders along with vermin in general. Namira is also known as the goddess of the dark, or to the Khajiit, she is known as the Great Darkness or the Void. This is to do with her origin story in the Khajiit pantheon, this relating to the origins of the god cats. As in the Khajiit origin story, Fadamai would give birth to the last of her third litter in the Great Darkness. When Lorkhaj was born, the Great Darkness would learn its own name, this being Namira. Now, there are also other names and associations when it comes to Namira, like her other name, the spirit Daedra. This is because she is described to be the ruler of dark and shadowy spirits, along with her association with eternity. Namira sees herself as the rightful ruler of all spirits. We see this with the aspect of Namira's comments in the Second Era in the year 582.
Who am I? You could not hope to comprehend my true nature, filth. Think of me as an aspect of the Lady of Decay and rightful ruler of all spirits. I claim this land and all within it. None may defy me.
She is also known as the Daedric Prince of Hunger, having an association with beggars, pity, and disregard, along with being the patron saint of squalor. We see this with the story of the Beggar Prince, where she gives 3 gifts to a prince who wishes to be her apprentice. These 3 gifts are the gift of disease, the gift of disregard, and the gift of pity, essentially turning the man who was once the 13th child of the king of Valenwood into the Beggar Prince. With Namira also comes her various depictions. In some statues, Namira is depicted as a long-haired humanoid woman wearing robes. Alongside her, there is a small beast. In other depictions, Namira is less ladylike and more demonic sleep creature. So in some statues, Namira appears to have a slug-like body, a humanoid skeletal face and torso, with her figure being cloaked. She also has several arthropod legs coming out from her back, essentially crab-like legs. Namira on some occasions also appears as a beggar, swaddled in rags and having an unbearable stench, like we see in the story of the Beggar Prince. When it comes to Namira, there is also several signs and symbols, one of these being the bat, as the bat is heavily featured on the emblem of Namira. We also see in Khajiit belief that creatures that feast on rotting flesh are considered to be the spies of Namira. So this is essentially another sign of Namira. This also relates to one of her names being the Lady of Decay. We also see surrounding the appearance of the minions of Namira and her darkness, another sign, these being bugs destroying crops. So based on all of this, why would someone worship Namira? Well, when it comes to Namira, she represents several things. To some, she represents eternity and the spirit's path after death, which we see with her name being the spirit Daedra. So for those who worship Namira, it may be as a way to guarantee a good end of their days and eternity. But there are also other reasons that she may be worshipped. This being due to her association with beggars, pity, and things that inspire instinctive revulsion in mortals. But why would this make her worshipped? Well, when you think about it, in the case of beggars, when all others have turned their backs on you, your friends, your family, the priests for the god you worshipped, and even the god you worshipped, you're going to feel pretty awful, maybe even a bit revolting. So why not worship the Daedra who is said to inspire this feeling and said to be associated with those in your situation, as there is little she can do to make your situation worse. However, this is only one part of the story. To understand Namira better and why she may be worshipped, we should learn more about this Daedric prince. To do this, we should move on to the legacy of Namira. So what historical events has she been involved in? For this, we should start in the First Era, this being with two Chimeri mages who were worshippers of Namira. So they had created a weapon known as the Spell Plague. This was intended to be used against the Dwemer. The best way to describe the Spell Plague is that it is like a disease that takes away one's life force. This was a fast-acting spell that was fatal. However, there were problems with the idea of using this in their desire to defeat the Dwemer. This being that the spell was actually too powerful to be controlled, and this instead would lead for its need to be contained. This leading to the creators of the Spell Plague, along with the plague being locked in a vault that would be built inside of Heimland Keep to keep others from being exposed to this plague. House Telvanni would be left responsible for the keep, preventing people from wandering too close to the dangerous site. Now we move on to the story of the Beggar Prince, which also occurred at some point in the First Era. With the story of the Beggar Prince, there are variations to the story, and there is no knowledge as to whether or not this story is a historical telling of someone who did live in Tamriel, or it is a legend that has been made up and passed through the generations. Either way, it is important to the early history of Namira. So with the story of the Beggar Prince, it follows a person named Weedle. We do not know if Weedle was a man or a woman, as this differs by story, but what we do know is that Weedle was the 13th child of the King of Wayrest. Being the 13th child did not entitle Weedle to much. They basically were not in line for the throne and were unlikely to inherit anything. This would lead to Weedle's decision to leave the castle and make their own fortune and glory in distant lands without the shadow of his father or 12 siblings. A few days into their journey for fame and riches, they would encounter a deceased beggar. Now this beggar was being harassed by 3 men who were about to kill her. But Weedle, being the heroic person they were, would stop the murder of this poor deceased beggar, confronting the men that had been harassing the beggar. Weedle had a sword, whereas these simple peasants only had their farming tools, like scythes and pitchforks, so they did not desire to fight Weedle, who was an armoured figure charging at them. So the 3 men would flee. Weedle would then approach the beggar, who was wrapped in rags, who he could hardly stand the smell of. Weedle would ask the beggar what her name was, which the beggar would tell him her name was Namira. Weedle was at first taken aback. This was Namira, the Daedric Prince. This was his opportunity to hit the jackpot, as Namira was the Daedric Prince of all things gross and repulsive, her domain also being in disease. This would scare most away, except for Weedle, who saw it as an opportunity. So Weedle would ask Namira if he could be her apprentice. Namira would tell him that she does not desire an apprentice. And for 33 days and 33 nights, Weedle would follow Namira, begging Namira to make Weedle her apprentice. This being until the 33rd day, where Weedle was unable to talk after the continuous begging of Namira. He would get on his knees and beg silently. This is where Namira would tell him that he had completed his apprenticeship, and she would grant him powers. These being firstly, the power of disease. Weedle could choose any disease to be afflicted with, being able to change them at will, as long as he had a visible disease at all times. The next power he would be gifted with is the power of pity. This power would evoke pity from anyone that saw Weedle. And the final power Namira would grant Weedle would be the power of disregard. This meaning that people would disregard the presence of Weedle. Now this would horrify Weedle, as this was not at all what he had wished for after encountering Namira. To him, these gifts sounded like curses. Weedle saw no way to make his fortune with these. Namira would tell him that as he had begged her at her feet for 33 days and nights, he would do the same in the cities of men for his fortune. Namira would also tell him that he would become legend among beggars, being known as the Prince of Beggars, with his story being passed down through generations. And Namira's predictions would become true. He would be an irresistible beggar, with people tossing a coin at him whenever they saw his form. With the power of disregard, he would learn the secrets of men as they would disregard his presence, learning the secrets of the realms. His story became well known for generations after his death. Now, we move on to the Second Era, to the year 582. This is when the curse of the Spell Plague would resurface. This would occur when the Daggerfall Covenant, believing that Heimland Keep was a military base, would invade and open the reliquary that kept the Spell Plague contained. With the Daggerfall Covenant breaking into the reliquary, the Spell Plague would be released. This would infect and kill several Covenant soldiers, civilians in the area, and of course the Telvanni mages that had been protecting the area. This spreading throughout Heimland Keep, this curse would lead to angry spirits stalking the grounds of the keep, making the keep even more dangerous. But thankfully, the keep would be saved when a stranger would arrive and would break the curse. Now we move on, over to the Argonian village of Zal Ithix. This community of Argonians were a group of scavengers, so they would reuse and repurpose whatever they found in the forest around their settlement. This village lived in peace with the forest, with their hist tree growing nearby. However, in the year 582 in the Second Era, strange things began to occur. The Horvors and the Stranglers that also lived in the forest that had previously left the Argonians alone became aggravated and aggressive. This would be due to the worshippers of Namira meddling with the forest and the hist tree. This would be through the bearing of a relic related to Namira at the base of the hist tree. This relic was known as the Hand of Namira. The reason for doing this was that it was Namira's desire to show the Argonians that the Hists were nothing compared to her, and that the spirits of the Argonians belonged to her, not to the Hists. The relic did weaken the Hist, especially with the ritual that Namira's worshippers performed. But this would not last. This would be due to the Vestige coming along and digging up the Hand of Namira. The Vestige would then bring it to the Tree Minder, who would help to end Namira's poisoning of Zal Ithix. Moving on, over to the Temple of Seven Riddles in Reaper's March. So with this temple, there is the belief that the temple was built too tall, as Khajiits are not supposed to stand so close to Jar-Kah-Jay before the dead climb. This is why they had issues with the Dro-M'Athra within the Temple of Seven Riddles. The Dro-M'Athra are a dark spirit reflection of the Khajiit. They are corrupted souls claimed by Namira. These Khajiits are often born under the sign of the Dark Eclipse, making them more prone to corruption and Namira's influence. But anyway, so this was not the first time that the temple had issues with the Dro-M'Athra. As with the Dro-M'Athra and the Temple of Seven Riddles, there is a story of the Stone Tapper, who was a moon bishop from long ago. So with the story of the Stone Tapper, he was the moon bishop of the temple who carried a magic stick. Now this magic stick had the ability to tell the Stone Tapper secrets when it was tapped on the floor. So the Stone Tapper would tap this magic stick on the floor day and night, learning all of the secrets of Nian. But with the Stone Tapper's constant tapping, the magic stick would run out of Nian's secrets, leading it to move on to something darker. These darker secrets being Namira's secrets. Now, the Stone Tapper would not be turned away from these secrets. No. Instead, the dark secrets would turn him crazy as he grew older, with his constant tapping. But the Stone Tapper was not the only one that went mad with these secrets, as he was not the only one in the temple. The monks inside of the temple would also be driven crazy by the constant tapping sounds they would hear. The tapping sounding like a heartbeat. Now with this, the monks would eventually plot to kill the Stone Tapper, luring him into the High Lunarium. This is where the monks would stab the Stone Tapper, and now the Stone Tapper would lay dying with the blood and secrets draining from his body. He would die in the High Lunarium, and the blood and secrets would lead to the temple breaking in two. This would reveal the Maw of Lorcage. Now, depending on who tells the tale, will depend on what occurs next, but there are two main versions of the tale. The first being that the stone tapper awakens, drained of all of his blood, not being too thrilled with the monks, of course, so the stone tapper kills them with lightning. In the other version, a great winged beast emerges from Lorcage's throat and eviscerates the monks. Either way, the monks don't survive the encounter, and the Dro M'Athra are released upon the temple. But this hole between Nian and the dark behind the world would eventually be closed, and there would be seals built within the temple to keep the Dro M'Athra at bay. But why is this important? Well, in the year 582, Namira would become interested in the temple, and the temple's abbot, Kulan Dro, would hear the beating heart of Lorcage. This would lead to the abbot breaking the protective seals. With the breaking of the protective seals, Namira's minions would once again gain access to the temple. Namira's minions would assault the temple and corrupt the monks within it, with the bent dance turning monks into Dro M'Athra. The corruption of the temple would last until the Undaunted and the Twilight Cantors would arrive, putting an end to Namira's hold on the temple. They would do this by driving back the Dro M'Athra, who had overcome the temple. They would also confront the abbot, who had been key on allowing the invasion to occur. Now, as the Undaunted and the Twilight Cantors were working to close the breach, a large winged Dro M'Athra by the name of Rakat would break free of Lorcage's maw, and would also attack those who were trying to close the breach. The Undaunted would manage to kill Rakat, and the Twilight Cantors would finally manage to seal the breach, stopping any more of Namira's minions from entering the temple. Now we move on to the small village of Black Heights, still in the year 582 in the Second Era. In the village, they had an ancient mural known as the Wall of Life, this being a part of the village's death rites. However, Namira had tainted it with dark magic, this being through her manipulation of a vulnerable Khajiit years prior. This being the painter Dakradi. Namira shook the faith of Dakradi by convincing him that his wife, who had passed, was abandoned by Kanathi, and that Kanathi had abandoned Dakradi along with his terminally ill son. With Namira's manipulation, Dakradi would mix a special paint with components and a ritual under the guidance of Namira, and this paint would be used to leave Dakradi's mark upon the Wall of Life when his time came to pass. So when Dakradi passed, he would be transformed into a Dro M'Athra, and in the years since his passing, the darkness he left influenced the Wall of Life, with great darkness coming from the mark he had left upon the Wall of Life. After Dakradi had left his mark, any person sent to leave theirs would have their soul claimed by Namira rather than Kanathi. This would be until the Twilight Cantors visited Black Heights, as they, with the assistance of the Vestige, would purge Dakradi's dark influence from the Wall of Life, allowing future souls to pass in peace. Now we move into the Third Era, this being into the year 405 with an Agent of the Blades. Now Namira would task the Agent of the Blades with a little assignment. She would request that the Agent of the Blades kill an ancient vampire that had fallen out of her favor. For completing Namira's quest, the Agent of the Blades would be gifted the Ring of Namira, given to them by a worshipper of Namira. Now we move on to the year 433, still in the Third Era. This is when the hero of Kvatch would encounter Namira. Now, the hero of Kvatch would be given the task to kill a group of priests of Arkay. These priests of Arkay had been attempting to convert followers of Namira into worshippers of Arkay, harassing those that made the ancient Ayleid ruin of Anger their home. The hero of Kvatch would help out with these problematic priests and would be rewarded with the Ring of Namira. Now we move on to the Fourth Era in the year 201. This is where the last Dragonborn would encounter the cult of Namira in Reachcliff Cave. Here, the cult would task the last Dragonborn with a rather gruesome task. They would task the last Dragonborn with assisting them in dealing with the priest that had been preventing entry into the Hall of the Dead. The followers of the cult of Namira, along with the last Dragonborn, would bring the priest of Arkay to the shrine of Namira, and the last Dragonborn and the worshippers of Namira would kill the priest and feast on his flesh. So with the history of Namira, why would anyone choose to worship Namira? Well, when it comes to the history of Namira, if we first look at the story of Dakradi from the Second Era, Dakradi, although he would not be seen as a traditional worshipper of Namira, she reached out to him whilst he was in a dark place. Dakradi, at the time of his encounter with Namira, had just lost his wife and was alone in caring for their terminally ill son. With the tragedies that had befallen him, he could be seen as an easy target. He was convinced to feel as if his god Kanathi had turned his back on the entire family, and Namira, being the Daedric Prince of Spirits, was there for them, helping him pick up the pieces. With this, we see Namira preying upon the vulnerability of those who do not yet worship her. But this is not the only story of Namira. We also have Namira and her interactions with Temple of Seven Riddles. Both her interactions with the Stone Tapper, who she preyed upon the curiosity of by having her secrets fed to him when the secrets of the world ran out, but also her preying upon of the Abbot in the Second Era. She would use the sound of Lorcash's heartbeat to drive the curiosity of the Abbot, also slowly messing with his sanity in the process, until he would endanger the rest of the temple by breaking the protective seals, as he would have known how dangerous it was to break those seals. But if he was sane in that time, he would have never done it. So with this, both the Stone Tapper and the Abbot had uncontrolled curiosity, which we see could easily be manipulated to achieve Namira's goals. But what about those who were not manipulated by Namira? Well, if you look at the story of the Beggar Prince, he saw opportunity with Namira, which is why he followed her for 33 days and nights. Namira did not ask to be worshipped by him, or followed, but the Beggar Prince insisted. This being in an attempt to gain fame and fortune, which in a twisted way, Namira provided in the gifts for the beggar to do so. So the Beggar Prince's vanity and desires were their own downfall when it came to them being drawn to Namira, attempting to draw opportunity out of the prince. The Beggar Prince, like the others, were vulnerable, as he was the 13th child of the king, making him essentially a nobody. Seeing his siblings becoming important would have made him feel as though he was an outcast compared to them. So based on Namira's history, many of those who have been singled out by Namira are vulnerable, and even in some cases outcasts, which is why they turn to her or accept her advances. But this is only one part of the story, not the full picture. We should move on to discuss who worships Namira. So when it comes to Namira worshippers, the main group who specifically worship her as a god or goddess are the Reach folk. In the eyes of the Reachmen, Namira is the spirit queen, as she rules over the infinite spirit realm. Namira in the Reachman pantheon represents darkness and endings, but also rebirth. If you look at the origin story for the Reachmen, the feelings towards Namira are rather different than you usually see. So in the Reachfolk origin story with Lorc, it is said that Lorc would visit the darkness but would not see it as just nothingness, instead as a place of possibility. He would find a place in the void where things could exist. Lorc would convince Namira to allow him to make a realm for the spirits in return for sacrificing himself. The realm of Lorc's creation, however, was not a kind place or paradise. Instead, it would be a hard and painful place to teach spirits through suffering. And in the belief of the Reachfolk, those who suffer most know best. With the Reachfolk pantheon, Hircine and Namira are also linked. In the Reachfolk belief, Hircine is like a guide through the struggles of Nian, and in death, the role is handed over to Namira, who acts as a psychopomp or spirit guide to the dead, this being whilst their souls wait to be enlightened. Because of this, Namira serves as a sort of dual purpose in the Reachfolk belief, this being for both in the beginnings of life and in the end of life. Namira also serves another purpose in Reachfolk belief, but this is more to do with the very end, the sort of end of days beliefs. So in Reachman belief, during the end of all days, Hircine will appear to fight alongside the Reachman. This is when Lorc's dark heart will be reawakened and start beating again, after being fueled by the deaths of mortals. With this story, darkness would spread from the depths and consume everything, well, almost everything. The Reachfolk believed that only those faithful to Namira would be spared from the all-consuming darkness. But anyway, this does not tell us about how Reachfolk clans actually worship Namira, because this will actually vary clan to clan. If we look specifically at the Bold Claw clan, they have their own rituals used in the worshipping of Namira, this being what is called Namira's dance. In this ritual, the entire Bold Claw clan participates. They all arrive in a clearing in the forest, this including the youngest and oldest members of the clan. In the center of the clearing, they have a large fire, which everyone gathers around. most of the clan are dressed in dark colours with dark paint slathered across their faces and throats, whilst other members of the clan arrive naked, these symboling how they of course were born, as no one is born into this world in a full suit of armour. Anyway, these two groups dance together to symbolise the Reach folk belief of death and rebirth. Throughout this dance, there does end up being blood spilt, with many of those participating ending up with blood on themselves. This dance is an important ritual that is part of the Bold Claw clan worship of Namira, but this practice is not carried across to other groups within. This is actually one of the more mild practices that are used by various clans to worship Namira. If we look at other clans within the Reach folk, some have darker ritualistic practices that are part of their worshipping of Namira. An example of this being human sacrifice. We see this in the Ghost Song clan. What is interesting about the Ghost Song clan and their close relationship with Namira is that they actually are in communication with Namira, and with that communication, they are provided with darker, more powerful secrets, like that of the Dark Heart. This being something that Namira has directly told the foremothers of the clan. For the Ghost Song clan, part of their strong link to Namira comes from their blood sacrifices, as they believe the death and permanence of this sacrifice is what pleases Namira. However, the Ghost Song clan had not practiced this for a long while. But in the Second Era, in the year 582, there was an attempt to bring back the old ways of blood sacrifice as a method of worshipping Namira. In the eyes of the Ghost Song clan, to gain power, they must be willing to sacrifice what is dear to them, this being their friends and family within the clan. We see this with the events of the Ghost Song clan in the year 582 in the Second Era, with much of the clan actually becoming sacrificed. This also resulting in the leader of the clan being transformed into a Void Mother as part of their worship and the sacrifices to Namira. So, for the Ghost Song clan, their worship of Namira mostly surrounds sacrifice as a way to gain her favour. They are not the only group that practice sacrifice. We also see this with the Crow Wife clan, which are another group of Reachmen. This group also practice human sacrifice. In the Crow Wife clan, these human sacrifices occur every 2 moons dark, so they occur during an eclipse. Eclipses occur several times a year in Tamriel. So, with the Crow Wife clan, there will be a child chosen. This can either be one of theirs or a slave child that will be sacrificed to Namira. This child will have their heart cut out as part of the sacrifice. Children also deemed too weak are also sacrificed to Namira. This is not the only kind of sacrifice that the Crowwife clan is known for. No, they also participate in several others, like burning people alive and ritual dismemberment. That is not all. They also do participate in bathing in blood. Now, there are non-Reachman groups who do worship Namira. We see this in various cults, and depending on the cult will also depend on the practices, as like with the different Reachfolk clans also depend on the different methods of Namira worship. We see this with the Forgotten Ones over in Anger. They as a group live in misery, filth and darkness as a way of worshipping Namira. However, others like those found in the Hall of the Dead over in Skyrim instead worship Namira for other reasons, and through other methods. Those found in the Hall of Dead happen to have a darker reason for worshipping Namira, as they have cannibalistic tendencies. What is interesting about cannibalism when it comes to Namira is that if you look at the beliefs surrounding what counts as cannibalism with Namira and her followers, a large part of this being that the consumption of ogres is not actually viewed as cannibalism by Namira cultists. We also see this sentiment with other more bestial races, like that of harpies, these being the half-woman, half-bird creatures, with the consumption of these being viewed by some as like eating giant birds. It is not known what Namira's opinion on harpies are, but it is possible that they are similar to the consumption of ogres. So based on her worshippers and how they worship Namira, why would anyone choose to worship her? Well, if we look at the Reachfolk clans as a whole, they believe that Namira is key to death and rebirth, along with surviving the all-consuming darkness that comes with the end of days. But along with this, some of the Reachfolk clans do have a darker side to their worship of Namira, like the Ghost Song clan. The worship of Namira in this clan was used to bring about a dark prophecy known as the Dark Heart prophecy that required much human sacrifice but also granted much power in return. So, for the Reachmen, Namira is worshipped as a spirit guide, but also as a granter of dark power. But to other groups, like that of the Forgotten Ones, she is acceptance. The various cults of Namira are often made of those who have been ostracized, whether it be because of beauty or lack thereof, or because of cannibalistic tendencies. So with this, we see that there are a variety of reasons, whether this be for the traditional reasons like we see with the Reach folk, where she is more of a spirit guide and there for them in the end of times, or in the cults that form she is a supporter of the repulsive, downtrodden, and the ostracized. But this does not fully answer the question as to why someone might seek out and worship Namira. To do this, we must move on to discuss Namira's creations. With Namira's creations, these can be classified into 3 different groups. The first, of course, being the realm in oblivion, this being the scuttling void. The next, her living creations, these being things like the Void Mothers and the Droam Atheras. And the final category is her artifacts. So to start with Namira's creations, we should start with her realm in oblivion. This being the scuttling void, or for the Khajiits, it is known as the dark behind the world. With Namira's realm, considering that she is considered to be the Daedra of all things dark and repulsive, it actually looks rather beautiful. The skies being purple along with the frequent aurora lights found in the skies, the realm is filled with various ruins, floating stones, and glowing plants and coral. Other than its appearance, not much is known about the scuttling void. The rare glimpses of it being caught through what is known as the Maw of Locage, which is when a breach between Nian and this realm occurs. This is where the Droam Athra are able to slip out of. Which, speaking of, we should discuss the creatures created by Namira. So with the Droam Athra, the creation of these creatures comes from the twisting of the souls of Khajiits, this being through the bent dance. If we look at the Khajiit origin story for the Droam Athra, we can gain an understanding of where this bent dance comes from. So the first Droam Athra was said to have come from Locage, this being from the hole in his chest where his heart should have been. Instead, there was just a great darkness within it. This great darkness beat like a heart. Azura would recognize this great darkness and tear it out of Locage, and from this, the first Droam Athra would be created. But as we know, this is not the only Droam Athra to exist. The Droam Athra are known to dance the bent dance to the beat of Locage's heart, which takes hold of those who are considered to be most vulnerable, becoming corrupted during their life. In the beginning of the process to becoming a Droam Athra, there are several signs and symptoms, these being a strong pain and even hearing voices in one's head. They are also said to hear the beat of the bent dance. The affected Khajiit will then begin to have a twitch in their tails. Their shadow will expand. They will then begin to dance to the tune that no one else can hear. But this does pose an interesting question. Can only Khajiits be affected by this? Well, both yes and no. Due to the duality of the Khajiit's soul, they are vulnerable to becoming Droam Athra through the bent dance, completely transforming into these creatures. But they are not the only ones that can experience the symptoms. When it comes to how the Droam Athra issue affects other races, it is rather different, as you will not see a Nord become one of these creatures. However, there is a case of a Nord becoming possessed by one of these. This being Ulov Stormwall. He does not become a Droam Athra, but the spirit essentially controls him during the period it possesses him. So the Droam Athra are a perversion of the Khajiit spirit that, when not in Tamriel, are primarily found in the scuttling void, being souls claimed by Namira. These are not the only creatures created by Namira. We also have the Void Mothers. These are also known as Void Liches or Shades. These 3 creatures can essentially be classified as shades. So shades are known to be hungry and hateful spirits that have become trapped in the void. So the shade spirits are spirits that have been corrupted through their contact with the Dark Heart or other sources of Namira's energy. We do have cases of the purposeful corruption of people in the Reachfolk clans to become Void Mothers through their contact with Namira's energy. Shades are a form of undead creature that have the ability to consume the souls of their victims. There are cases of Void Mothers occurring in the year 582 in the Second Era, this being due to the Reach clan named the Ghost Song clan, through their use of dark rituals and human sacrifice. On occasions like these, this is done to gain and abuse dark power. So these are Namira's creature creations, twistings, and corruptions of the soul. But they are not the only things she has created. Namira has also created and been associated with several artifacts. An example of these being the Ring of Namira. Now this ring is not just a piece of costume jewelry. It actually has some rather useful side effects. Well, this depending on who the ring has been gifted to. In the year 405 in the Third Era, the ring reflects damage. This also being seen in the year 433, also in the Third Era. But in the Fourth Era, there is a rather interesting change. For the wearer in this era, in the year 201, the wearer is granted a new special perk if they partake in cannibalism. This being that they have both increased health and increased health regeneration, but only when they eat a corpse. Of course, Namira does enjoy and encourage the partaking of cannibalism. Another of Namira's artifacts is the Hand of Namira. The Hand of Namira is as it sounds. It is a severed hand that also happens to be rotting. What is interesting about this relic is that it not only invokes fear in mortals, but also in the Dremora that serve Namira. It is said that this relic can destroy Dremora if used against them. The Hand of Namira has been used to corrupt several creatures within the forest during the attempt to poison the hist tree of the Argonians of Zal Ithix. So based on the creations of Namira, why would anyone worship her? Well, if we look at the Void Mothers and Shade side of things, we can see that those who come from the Reach folk background and have the deep connection and association with Namira, they may be more inclined to worship her, especially with the dark side to her worship. The Void Mother transformation, although the cost is great, it also has many benefits to it, providing great power. With the Reach folk belief that suffering is necessary in life, it would make the creation of Void Mothers and the sacrifice along with it seen as suffering that was worth it for the good of the clan. If we look at other aspects like the Ring of Namira, we see that the ring has both the power to protect, in that it reflects the damage onto the person attacking the wearer of the ring, but it also provides health benefits, although through peculiar ways. So with the creations of Namira, depending on the person, it may be seen as beneficial to worship Namira and obey her when she gives quests, as they can be seen as rewarding. Especially considering if one has cannibalistic tendencies, the Ring of Namira would be generally rather helpful. Hold on, pause this. Before we proceed with the video, there was great viewer interest in the topic of Namira. So I would like to thank all of the viewers who suggested the topic, especially Cyber Dark Turtle. Viewer suggestions are always welcome. But anyways, back to the video. So, based on who Namira is, her legacy, who worships her, along with the creations of Namira, we can answer the question, why would anyone choose to worship Namira? Well, with Namira being considered to be the patron saint of squalor, those in extreme poverty situations like beggars may be more inclined to turn towards Namira. We see with the Forgotten Ones living in filthy dark conditions over in anger as a form of worship to her. We don't know what their origins were, as some people may have came as beggars, others may have given up things to become part of the Forgotten Ones. With beggars who have knowledge of the Beggar Prince story, Namira may be an attractive god to worship, as the Beggar Prince was in the end famous and knowledgeable of all the secrets of the realm, as well as frequently given money. But beggars are not the only downtrodden members of society. We also have cases like Dakradi, the Khajiit from the Second Era in the year 582. Now, Dakradi being a Khajiit is not exactly a normal worshipper of Namira. However, considering what had occurred, this being that his wife, who was afflicted with a genetic disorder, had died, and Namira picked up on his vulnerability, would turn him into essentially a worshipper, as Namira did have Dakradi perform rituals in her name, which would curse, of course, his entire village into having their souls taken by her. Yes, Dakradi was not a traditional worshipper, however, he was a person that was vulnerable and suffering. But Namira is not just known for seeking out those suffering. No, she is known for other things in other cultures. With this, we also have Namira being known as the Spirit Queen or the Spirit Daedra. We see this with the Reach folk belief in her importance in the afterlife, with their belief that she acts as a sort of spirit guide to those who have passed, enlightening their souls, providing those who have worshipped her with safety in the end of all days in the Reachman belief. Along with this, some of the more power-hungry Reach folk, like the leader of the Gosong clan, use the prophecy of Namira to gain power through transformation into a Void Mother, doing so by sacrificing much of her clan in the process. this being seen as not only a way to return to the older ways of the clan, but also as a way of gaining power, this being very helpful if they were at war. The Reach folk are not the only group who have seen Namira as a prince able to provide them with what was needed. We also see evidence of this with 2 Chimer mages, using Namira worship as a way of creating powerful weapons to use against the Dwemer. But with the spell plague, the destructive power of it was much too powerful to be controlled. So why Namira may be worshipped comes down to several reasons, both cultural and broad. Namira is the Daedric Prince of the downtrodden and ostracized, being the patron saint of squalor, being associated with all that inspires revulsion in mortals. She comforts others in their time of need, when they feel all is lost. But she also is the ghostly hand that some souls hold after they pass, the gentle guide into the afterlife and the protector when the eternal darkness comes. For others, she is the granter of immense power, through the spell plague, the Dro M'Athra, and even the Void Mothers. Although this power is not the most easily controlled in some cases. So you yourself may choose to worship Namira if you are a member of the Reach folk, hoping for guidance in the end, or if you feel ostracized and left out in the cold by your own, especially in your time of need. You may also seek out Namira if you feel the need for immense power, especially in times of trouble or war. So let me know in the comments, would you worship Namira? If you enjoyed this video, then you will enjoy this one. It is about the Daedric Prince here seen and why someone may want to worship him.